Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling decision making,
Ah, yes. Decisions.
but
Decisions.
with a twist.
Uh,
We're looking at how our brains handle those choices as we age.
Intriguing.
Those impulsive teenager decisions. Get ready to see them in a whole new light.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Always up for shifting perspectives.
Okay, so our main source today is this super interesting study from PLOS Biology
PLOS biology. Okay, I'm listening.
by Vanessa Schultz, Lorenz DeZerno, and their team. And they really went deep on this concept of
Decision noise.
yeah, decision noise. Basically, those times we make, well, not the best choices, even when we kind of know better.
Like we have the information, but something else is going on.
Right. And what blew my mind is they found teenagers have a ton of this noise.
Really? More than adults.
Way more. I was all set to blame it on, just being young and all.
The classic teenager excuse.
But there's actually something deeper happening here.
I knew it. So it's not that they're making bad decisions necessarily.
Right. It's not about being bad at it. Yep.
It's more like there's just way more variability in their choices.
More ups and downs, like
Yeah.
all over the place.
Exactly. And here's the kicker, that variability, it actually decreases as they get older.
Okay. Makes sense. More life experience and all.
And get this, that decrease, it's directly tied to them developing stronger decision-making skills.
Whoa, hold on. So you're saying a little bit of noise early on is actually good for us?
That's what the research suggests. It's like that early noise helps us build a more sophisticated system later on.
Huh. That's not what I expected at all. So how does that work? Like, what's going on in those teenage brains?
Well, remember, those brains are still under construction, right? Especially in areas like the prefrontal cortex, which handles planning and impulse control.
Right, that's the brain's control center, right? It's still getting wired up.
Exactly. So they're working with limited resources, which can lead to simpler strategies.
Simpler, like not overthinking things so much.
In a way, yeah. And it also means they're more easily influenced by things like, peer pressure.
Oh, classic peer pressure. Or maybe those exciting risks that make adults cringe.
Exactly. And it's not just about being rebellious. It's literally how their brains are wired at that stage.
Fascinating. So it's like their brains are still figuring out how to filter all that incoming information.
That's a great way to put it. Now, this doesn't mean adults are off the hook. We all have decision noise,
Oh, for sure. I've made my share of questionable choices.
We've all been there. The difference is, as we get older, we generally get better at filtering out that noise.
So our brains learn to tune out the static.
You got it. We become less swayed by emotions and more capable of making deliberate, well-thought-out choices.
Choices that align with our long-term goals, instead of just what feels good in the moment.
Precisely. And that ability to filter out the noise, that might be a key part of how our decision-making matures.
Okay, that makes sense. So those early noisy decisions, maybe they're less about making the right choice and more about, well, learning how to make choices at all.
Exactly. Like it's the training ground for becoming a better decision maker later on.
I'm starting to see things differently already. Instead of judging those teenage choices, I'm seeing them as like part of the development process.
It's all about growth, right?
But hold on a sec. If teens have all this decision noise, does that mean their choices are just, well, flat out worse? Like, are they just doomed to make bad calls?
Now that's where it gets really interesting. And the study doesn't give us a simple yes or no answer.
So there's nuance here.
Definitely. Those noisier choices, they could lead to both good and bad results.
So some of those impulsive decisions, the ones that make us adults shake our heads, they might actually lead to amazing discoveries.
Precisely. Think about it. Sometimes those choices that didn't seem like the best idea at the time, they end up having surprisingly positive consequences.
I guess that's where the whole learn from your mistakes thing comes in.
Exactly. It's not always about being perfect in our decision-making, but about embracing that learning process, even if it gets a little messy sometimes.
So it's less about being right all the time and more about, well, growing and adapting along the way.
You got it. And this study really highlights how decision noise and development are linked in this complex way.
So it's not as simple as more noise equals bad decisions.
Right. It's about how noise plays a part in how we learn and adapt as we grow.
Okay, I'm following you. So we've established that noise decreases as we get older, and that's linked to better decision making.
Right.
But how does that actually happen in our brains? Like, what's physically changing?
Now we're getting to the really fascinating stuff. Remember we talked about how those teenage brains are still developing?
Yeah, the control center is still under construction.
Exactly. And as it matures, as those connections get stronger, we get better at filtering out distractions.
So less squirrel moments.
You could say that. We get better at resisting those tempting impulses and making choices that support our long-term goals.
Instead of just going for that instant gratification.
Precisely. It's all about developing that stronger sense of self-control.
So basically, better control equals less noise getting in the way.
You got it. We become less swayed by emotions, more capable of those deliberate choices.
So it's like our brains are building a stronger noise filter as we mature.
Exactly. But here's the million-dollar question. Does that automatically mean we make the right decisions more often?
Good point. I mean, what looks best on paper isn't always best for us in the long run, right? Life's complicated.
Exactly. And that's where things get nuanced. This study, it looked at how noise impacts our consistency and adaptability.
Okay, so less noise helps us stay focused, make choices that line up with our goals.
But it doesn't guarantee that those choices are always the absolute best ones.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So less noise might help us be more efficient, but it doesn't mean we're always going to be happy with the outcomes.
You're catching on. And this raises a really interesting question, one we're going to dig into more in our next deep dive. Could becoming too good at filtering out noise actually be a disadvantage?
Wait, a disadvantage? How so?
Well, think about it. If we're always optimizing, always taking the most logical path, might we miss out on some amazing opportunities?
Because we're too focused on what we think we want instead of being open to the unexpected.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, does that teenage noise have more value than we give it credit for? Could it be the key to staying open to new experiences, discovering things we never planned for?
I'm already rethinking everything I thought I knew about decision-making.
That's what we're here for, to challenge those assumptions.
Well, listeners, buckle up because things are about to get even more interesting. We're diving deeper into the unexpected benefits of decision noise and what it could mean for you.
Get ready to rethink what it means to be a good decision maker. It really makes you question that whole idea of always striving for the perfect decision.
Right, like maybe a little bit of that teenage noise isn't such a bad thing after all.
Exactly. What if it's actually pushing us to, try new things, be more spontaneous?
Find those unexpected joys, even if they weren't part of the plan.
Precisely. If we're constantly optimizing every single choice, always taking the most efficient, logical route,
we might miss out on those happy accidents.
the serendipitous moments that lead to growth, to discovery.
Okay, so what does that mean for us, the not quite teenagers anymore, but still figuring things out adults?
The in-betweeners.
Should we be, actively trying to inject some of that noise back into our decision-making?
That's a fascinating question, and I think it depends a lot on the individual and the situation, of course.
Of course. So some people thrive on structure, on having a clear plan.
Right, and for them, being highly efficient in their decision-making, that brings a sense of calm, of control.
But for others, that might feel, stifling, uninspiring.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you, what feels right for your personality, your goals.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to decision-making.
Absolutely not. The key is being aware of what's influencing your choices, how much noise you're comfortable with.
This makes me think about all those times I've agonized over a decision, weighing every pro and con.
Paralysis by analysis.
Totally. And then I end up feeling even more stuck.
Sometimes overthinking leads to worse outcomes than just going with your gut.
So sometimes it's better to just trust that inner voice, even if it doesn't make perfect sense on paper.
Our intuition can be a powerful guide, even if we don't fully understand the reasons behind it.
It's like those feelings, those gut instincts, they don't always fit neatly into a spreadsheet.
Precisely. It's about embracing the messy, unpredictable side of decision-making.
Recognizing that sometimes the most rewarding choices are the ones we don't overanalyze.
Exactly. And this study, it also mentioned that decision noise could be linked to creativity, to innovation.
Oh, that's interesting. Like being open to those random ideas, those sparks of inspiration.
Right. If we're always filtering out the noise, sticking to the tried and true, we might miss those flashes of insight.
The aha moments that lead to breakthroughs.
Precisely. It's about creating space for those noisy thoughts to emerge, the ones that might not seem logical at first.
But could lead to something amazing.
Exactly. So maybe there's a connection between that teenage noise and the kind of creative energy that drives progress, that leads to change.
I love that idea. Like, those who are more comfortable with a bit of noise, they're more likely to challenge the status quo.
Think outside the box, come up with solutions that others might miss.
I'm seeing decision noise in a whole new light now. It's not just a nuisance, it's a source of potential.
It's a driver of exploration, of innovation.
Okay, so we've talked about how noise affects us as individuals.
Right.
But what about on a larger scale?
Mm.
Like, how does decision noise play out in groups or even in society as a whole?
That's a great question. And it's something researchers are starting to explore more.
Because if our individual choices are influenced by noise, what happens when you put a bunch of noisy decision makers together?
It gets complicated, that's for sure. Collective decision-making, it's just as susceptible to noise as individual decision-making.
I can imagine. Think about group projects or family decisions.
Exactly. And just like individuals, groups can get swayed by emotions, by biases,
They can fall into groupthink, where everyone just goes along with the majority opinion.
or they can get polarized, where different viewpoints become so entrenched that it's almost impossible to find common ground.
This makes me think about how decision noise might play out in, like, political debates or social movement.
Oh, absolutely. In those situations, there's so much noise coming from different directions.
Media coverage, social media, political rhetoric, it can be overwhelming.
And all that noise, it can make it really hard to separate fact from fiction, to figure out what's truly important.
And it can lead to people making decisions based on incomplete information or just reacting out of fear.
Rather than really thinking things through.
This highlights how crucial it is to be a critical thinker, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Absolutely. We need to develop those media literacy skills, be able to evaluate sources, spot biases.
And we also need to be aware of our own biases, how they might be shaping our views.
Because we all have our own unique experiences, our own perspectives that color how we see the world.
Right, and those perspectives can create blind spots, make it hard to see things from other points of view.
So it's all about being open to challenging our own assumptions, seeking out diverse perspectives.
Having those tough conversations even when we disagree.
Exactly. And that's something that's becoming more and more important in our increasingly interconnected world.
This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to how decision noise isn't just an individual thing.
It's something that affects us all at every level.
It shapes our individual choices, our group dynamics, even the direction of society.
It's woven into the fabric of our lives.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. We've covered so much ground.
From those neurons firing in our brains to the complex social dynamics that shape our world.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore. But before we wrap up,
Yes. Before we go, I want to circle back to one of the big questions we started with. If a little noise can help us learn and grow, could there be a downside to becoming too efficient in our decision-making?
As adults, we often pride ourselves on being decisive, on making those smart choices.
But what if we're missing out on something by always taking the most logical, optimized path?
What if we're closing ourselves off to new possibilities, to those serendipitous moments that can lead us in unexpected directions? What do you think?
I think this whole deep dive has shown us that good decision-making isn't just about being right all the time.
It's about finding that balance.
Between logic and intuition, between planning and spontaneity.
Exactly.
And maybe, just maybe, embracing a bit of that youthful exploration can help us stay adaptable, creative, even as we gain more experience.
It's about staying open to those unexpected twists and turns that life throws our way.
Because who knows, they might lead to something amazing. It's funny, right? We started talking about teenagers and, those impulsive decisions they make.
Right.
But it feels like we've stumbled onto something much bigger here.
Yeah, it's not just about teenagers, is it?
It's about recognizing that decision noise. It's something we all deal with throughout our lives.
At every age. Yeah.
And maybe instead of always trying to get rid of it, maybe we can learn to work with it.
Work with the noise.
Yeah, like harness that energy, that unpredictability.
See it as a potential source of, growth,
Of discovery.
Exactly. Instead of seeing noise as this, weakness.
A flaw in our system.
Right. What if it's actually a key to creativity, adaptability?
Even wisdom, maybe.
This makes me think about something we haven't really talked about yet.
Oh, what's that?
The connection between decision noise and, our sense of self.
Or sense of self. That's interesting.
Yeah, because we often think of our identity as this, fixed thing.
Right, who we are.
But what if it's actually constantly evolving, shaped by all those choices we make, the experiences we have?
Including the ones influenced by noise. I see where you're going with this. Exactly. Think about a time you made a choice that, maybe didn't make sense at the time.
A noisy choice.
Yeah, but it ended up leading you down this path that ultimately helped you grow or learn something new about yourself.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. It's like those detours that end up being the most scenic part of the trip.
Right. Maybe those noisy choices, they're actually chances to break free from, like our own expectations of ourselves.
To explore different sides of our personality.
Discover hidden talents, passions we didn't even know we had.
It's exciting when you think about it that way.
Right. So maybe embracing those unexpected twists and turns.
Those moments where we go off script.
That's what allows us to really evolve, to become more, well, ourselves.
I love that. It's like giving ourselves permission to be surprised by who we're becoming.
To embrace that messy process of self-discovery.
Because it is messy, isn't it? Life, I mean.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So maybe decision noise is not just this thing that affects our choices.
Right.
It's actually a force that shapes who we are, who we become.
It pushes us to grow.
To expand beyond those self-imposed limitations.
To become more than we thought we could be.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been such a mind-blowing experience.
I know, right? It's amazing what you can discover when you really start to, question your assumptions.
And to think it all started with those noisy teenagers.
They're onto something, those teenagers.
Maybe we should all channel our inner teenager a bit more often.
Embrace that curiosity, that willingness to experiment.
Take a few more risks, make a few more noisy choices.
You never know where they might lead.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of decision noise.
It's been a pleasure. Always happy to explore these big questions.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here, for engaging with these ideas.
Keep those brains buzzing.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and don't be afraid to embrace a little bit of noise in your life.